Hello! Now, I promise that I'll get to the topic at hand and why you clicked on this video. However, seeing that this is the first time that we've met each other, I believe that proper introductions are in place. So, my name is Alex. Hey, how are you? So I mainly wanted to keep this channel focused around books and my life at university. However, I couldn't help but engage myself with the wonderful world that is video essays. I'm someone who recently got into political theory and political philosophy, and now I want to talk about it. You can think of me as a discount version of the dollar store version of the Five Below version of the Walmart version of ContraPoints. So basically, I'm not that good. But alas, let's begin this video, shall we? And I'm just gonna say it. Animal Farm is not a critique of leftist economic policies. In fact, it's really in support of them. I've always been a largely left-leaning person, and as such, my more conservative friends and peers would always recommend for me to read Animal Farm by George Orwell. I suppose they thought that, had I read this novel, I would suddenly be converted into the wonderful church of libertarianism. Our Gary Johnson, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Is Gary Johnson even relevant anymore? Should I be praying to Ben Shapiro or Caitlin Bennett instead? Have the libertarians rejected Ben Shapiro and Caitlin Bennett? Yeah, libertarians. You do know they're fascists, right? Hail, Caitlin Bennett, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. In April, I finally got around to reading Animal Farm and learning about the Orwellian hellscape conservatives seem to think we'll be living in if the government enacts any economic policy even slightly more left than the ones we currently have. In fact, if you actually read Animal Farm, you'll see that it is not a critique of leftist economic policies, but rather a critique of totalitarian political ones. Before we do a deep dive into Animal Farm, and yes, there will be spoilers, if you've not read the novel yet, that is not my fault. Let's talk about the man, the myth, the legend, George Orwell. George Orwell, born as Eric Arthur Blair in June of 1903, was an English author whose work was largely associated with criticism of totalitarian governments. During the Spanish Civil War, Orwell actually went to Spain to fight because he felt an obligation to, and I quote, fight against fascism. We stan an Antifa king. Well, I could go on about Orwell's life, I'm not going to. And eventually, during World War II, he published Animal Farm, and in 1949, he published his other major work, 1984. However, Orwell is best known for his outspoken and adamant support of socialism, being quoted as saying that all other political theories and ideologies are hopeless and disillusioning. Why critique an ideology that you're such an adamant subscriber to? Now that we know that Animal Farm wasn't critiquing socialism, what the heck was it critiquing? And to do this, let's go over some of the plot from Animal Farm. The novel opens at the manor farm when a pig named Major gathers all the other animals into the barn to talk about a dream he had, where all the animals lived in harmony and they were not ruled by the oppressive human species. The animals all sing a song, it's quite very wholesome, the whole ordeal, and 3 days later, the pig dies. 3 younger pigs instead decide to take up his political philosophy, which they deem animalism. Now, if we really wanted to, we could do a whole reading of Animal Farm as a critique of the moral philosophy humanism, but I really don't want to, so let's just keep going. So the animals take the farm over. They rename it the titular Animal Farm, they write the 7 tenets of animalism on the barn wall, and very quickly we see 2 parties begin to diverge. One is led by Snowball, who stresses classical education and an industrializing economy, as shown by his adamant support in building a windmill. The other is led by Napoleon, who stresses a more practical education and is against the whole construction of the windmill. The people come back to reclaim the farm, but are again defeated at the Battle of Cowshed. Eventually, Napoleon becomes so power-hungry that he exiles Snowball as the 2 vied for power and influence. Napoleon says that the pigs will make the decisions from now on, as they know what's best for the rest of the animals who are living on the farm. He also starts going back on some of his other policies, like the whole windmill debacle. One day, the windmill is found destroyed, and Napoleon blames Snowball. This whole conspiracy then ensues, where accusations are being thrown around wildly. If there's even a shadow of a thought that you conspired with Snowball, the enemy, you're executed. One of the horses even takes up the maxim, Napoleon is always right. History starts to be rewritten where Snowball is seen as the enemy, and the pigs start violating the major tenets of animalism, always coming up with these awkward and roundabout rationales as to why they had to do it. Normally, they would always say that pigs know best. The horse that we talked about earlier, well, he eventually got old and was unuseful to the government. So Napoleon traded him to a glue maker for whiskey. Eventually, the pigs become more and more like humans, what with their whips and bipedalism, and eventually the 7 tenets, commandments, are reduced to a single slogan: all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. The idea here that conservatives like to propagate is that if we are to enact leftist economic policies, will it inevitably result in a totalitarian government. The whole thing is very Stalin Trotsky, very Russian Civil War, but what it's not is very socialist. If you haven't gotten it yet, the whole book is not a critique of socialism, but rather National Bolshevism. National Bolshevism was a very common belief in Russia that communism could be used to achieve nationalistic goals. Basically, you use leftist economic policies to achieve, how should I say it, more traditional cultural goals, like a white ethno-state. The theory behind National Bolshevism and horseshoe theory is quite fascinating. If you are at all interested in this, I highly recommend that you read about it. But think about it. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others sounds pretty fashy if you ask me. It's literally using the communist tenet of equality to further the goal of one group. In Orwell's case, the pigs. The whole novel is like this. The pigs control the food supply. They require all the other animals to work while they don't. And the whole time, they're manipulating the economic system that they've established to secure the advancement of their own group. In fact, before the pigs became this totalitarian entity, the farm actually thrived. The animals were happy, education literacy was thriving, and production on the farm was at an all-time high. Orwell didn't oppose leftist economic policies. In fact, as we just established, he supported them when there wasn't a totalitarian government involved. What he did oppose was a totalitarian government and fascist cultural policies. And yes, I will say it, Animal Farm is an allegory for Soviet Russia, a totalitarian regime. So there you go. Orwell didn't hate lefties. Orwell was a lefty. He just hated Soviet dictators. In reality, though, socialism and communism are ideologies that almost necessitate a non-totalitarian government in the purest sense. Worker co-ops, direct democracies, and more community programs are all major tenets of leftist economic policies, and all of those coincide with more freedom from the government. But let's take this one step further and bring 1984 into this and talk about the current state of America. I'm not going to go as deep into the plot of 1984 as I did for Animal Farm, but all you have to know is totalitarianism bad, Newspeak is double plus good, and we've always been at war with East Asia. Or was it Eurasia? I think the theme here is pretty clear. Orwell is opposed to totalitarian governments. Let's talk about American totalitarianism. In 1984, there are three major slogans: war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. I don't even have to go that far into American history to talk about these three slogans and how they apply to America today. First, we'll talk about war is peace. Why do you think the United States is involved in so many foreign conflicts? It ensures economic success for the nation. How do you think we came out of the Great Depression? Because it sure as hell was not the New Deal. No. It was World War II. And as a result, since then, we've developed a huge military-industrial complex. If we are to dismantle the military-industrial complex, we risk economic decline. And with economic decline comes revolution. And the bourgeoisie cannot risk a revolution in this nation. The second, freedom from slavery. I mean, capitalism. Think about all the people who protested the government lockdowns during the coronavirus. What exactly were they protesting for? They were protesting to go back to work and to get low-paying workers like hairstylists and nail technicians to also go back to work. They were protesting to fuel our capitalist system. And seeing how adamant and outspoken they were, it's pretty clear that they're slaves to the capitalist system. Freedom from the government lockdown means you're a slave to capitalism. And finally, ignorance is strength. I mean, honestly, there are so many examples of this. There's a reason why there's a saying that ignorance is bliss. Think about the people who are ignorant about the full effects of the coronavirus and protested the lockdowns that were in place. Think about the people who are ignorant about racism and feel strength in their privilege. Think about the people who are ignorant about the real state of America and feel strength in supporting Donald Trump. And of course, we cannot have a discussion about American totalitarianism without talking about Donald Trump. Rolling back transgender healthcare provisions, trying to exclude gay couples from adoption agencies, and of course, saying that he has total authority during the coronavirus situation. Like, conservative America, wake the hell up. You're afraid of living in an Orwellian hellscape, but you're already there with Trump. Now, let's talk about Newspeak. One thing that I find ironic is when conservatives make Orwellian newspeak references, like in J.K. Rowling's Turf Manifesto, implying that this is what will happen when the leftists take over, when in fact, Orwell himself was a leftist. Not to mention, the people who make these references are most likely anti-LGBT and especially T rights, anti-abortion, anti-drug, anti-Black Lives Matter, and maybe pro-military. Sounds pretty totalitarian if you ask me. Now, let's bring up the news. The news in 1984 is constantly changing, saying that we're at war with East Asia, no Eurasia, no East Asia, and we've always been at war with East Asia. No one questions this in the novel, though, because the people blindly follow the government. Now, I'm not saying America blindly follows the government or even major news networks. However, when the highest-ranking political figure in your country is constantly calling into question the validity of multiple major news networks and encouraging his followers to only subscribe to one major news network, it really calls into question who exactly Orwell was criticizing. And finally, let's wrap this up with Animal Farm again. The final tenet of the farm, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others, is quite reminiscent of conservative America, especially with the Black Lives Matter protests that are currently happening. A lot of conservatives like to say, well, I'm anti-Black Lives Matter because all lives matter. From that, we can extrapolate that all people are equal. But to be against Black Lives Matter necessitates that you're against the goal they're trying to achieve, getting Black lives to matter. From this, we can conclude that while all people are equal, some people are more equal than others.